I am in London, England, at the infamous Tower of London. I will be going inside to explore the fascinating and sometimes dark stories of this place, along with its various exhibits and incredible artifacts. This tour will be split into 2 separate videos, as this is a massive fortification and there's a lot to cover. The Tower of London is one of the most important castles in world history, probably the most significant and well known in England, and it has a very long and dense history. The tower complex takes up about 12 acres alongside the River Thames. Sections have been rebuilt and expanded several times since it was first established almost 1,000 years ago. The tower was founded by William the Conqueror, the new Norman king who entered into London after his victory at the Battle of Hastings in 1066, which essentially gave him reign over England. From there, the English monarchs have continued to add upon the tower, some have lived here, and eventually this place expanded into many other functions. I think it goes without saying that the Tower of London is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. This is the Traitor's Gate. The former entrance used to transport Tudor-era prisoners. These mortars were used by the Venetians. This is the East Gate. This is the one that a lot of weapons were transferred in and out of. Now I am going to enter the Tower of London. There are lots of 18th century cannons outside. This was the site of the ancient Roman riverside wall. The tower did originally envelop some of the Roman walls of Londinium. An elephant was sent by King Louis IX of France to King Henry III back in 1255, and the elephant lived right in there at the tower. This cannon was cast by the Ottomans in the 1850s and was intended for a Turkish expedition to India to rid of the Portuguese. The tower is home to a group of celebrity ravens, and here's their enclosure. There is a long-time legend that there always must be at least 6 ravens at the tower, or the tower and kingdom will fall. And at least 6 ravens have been here ever since, so the kingdom has not fallen. Currently, there are 9 of them. This massive fortress gun was captured by the British from a fort guard in Canton, China, during the Second China War. A number of architectural styles mix here at the tower. The crown jewel of the Tower of London, besides maybe the crown jewels, is the White Tower at the center. This is the original Tower of London, built by William the Conqueror in the year 1078. So this building is nearly 1,000 years old. That is absolutely incredible. Next to it are the remains of the 12th century Wardrobe Tower, built by King Richard I. It stores some valuables for the royal family. And this is a remainder of the ancient Roman city wall that protected the city of Londinium. Back 900 years ago, the White Tower was the main castle of London, so it was used for military defense and by the king to live in and have meetings. Then it was also used as a prison starting in the 1100s. The tower's role diminished by the 1300s. For a long time it was mainly used for storage of arms and munitions, along with the occasional imprisonment. For example, Richard II was jailed and abdicated his throne here in 1399. This is the Two Princes Staircase. The future King Richard III took his 2 nephews, brothers Edward V, who was directly in line for the throne, and Richard Duke of York into custody after their father died in 1483. He had them imprisoned in the Bloody Tower, and likely had them murdered to secure his path to the throne, as they were never seen again. During a renovation nearly 200 years later, The skeletons of 2 children were found tucked away at this entrance to the staircase. They were very likely the 2 princes, though the Church of England has never allowed the bodies to be examined. This old Norman fortress also happens to be one of the world's first tourist attractions. It's been open to paying visitors in some capacity since the 1600s. Many famous people visited back then, like Phyllis Wheatley, an 18th century African American poet from Massachusetts. Here's some authentic 1500s man and horse armor. It's been displayed in here for a long time, and the armor used to be worn by a mannequin that stood next to the mounted figure of Henry VII. All of these giant wooden horses were displayed as part of the former line of kings in here. A lot of the horses were mounted by wood-carved figures of select warrior kings wearing their authentic armor. Or usually it was someone else's armor, but guidebooks never lie, right? Now that attraction was definitely more for spectacle than accurate information, so a lot of the info was exaggerated, and there was a lot of mismatching of the artifacts. These were the breech loading guns of Henry VIII. He was very active and participated in the shooting of longbows and firearms like these. Special ranges were built for him to practice at Windsor Castle. This is the armor of King Henry VIII. Oh my gosh, that is so awesome. The armor was highly decorated with engravings and silvering, definitely fit for a king. This was one of the first pieces displayed as part of the line of kings, though during the 1700s the armor was actually displayed on Henry VII, only to be corrected in the 1820s. This is the 1540s field and tournament armor of King Henry VIII. It had interchangeable parts that could be switched out to give him advantages in tournaments, and he also would have worn this on the battlefield. He went to war with France in 1543, so he may have worn this at Boulogne. Surrounding the suit are the extra interchangeable pieces for the armor set, like reinforced tilts for jousting tournaments, and extra pieces for protection that could be worn under the breastplate. That is fascinating. This is another 1540 armor set of Henry VIII. In the line of kings, a wood-carved figure of Henry wore this armor on a horse. It was displayed like that since 1660. I kinda wish they still did it like that. There is a wall covered by antique breastplates and some more armor suits. This is the little armor set of a young Henry Stuart, Prince of Wales. It was made in 1607 and has scenes of Alexander the Great painted on it. This is the gilt armor of Charles I. This armor was also displayed on a figure of Charles I in the line of kings since 1660. Here are some more of the original wooden horses from the line of kings. Most of them were created in the late 1680s. I do really appreciate the curation here, how they lean into the history of this place as a tourist attraction, with emphasis on how the line of kings pieces were displayed. Here are some wooden hands and heads of the king figures that were made in the 1680s. I don't think any of the whole figures survived, unfortunately. The line of kings was originally established as a propaganda effort for the monarchy after the restoration by Charles II. This was advertised as William the Conqueror's armor. Unfortunately, it is not. None of his armor survived. This was the saddle of the horse that William III's figure sat upon. Very few of these original saddles survived. The horses were finely decorated. This is the armor of James II, mounted atop a carved horse. Because he abdicated, James II was originally not included in the line of kings. There is so much armor. This exhibit is amazing. This was the armor of Count Annibale Capitalista. He was the commander of a mercenary army for the Venetian Republic during the 1600s. Here's some Maximilian armor alongside some horses. This is French cuirassier armor from the 17th century. This fancy helmet is North Italian. It was probably made around 1470. This case contains the armor of young Charles I and Charles II. The opulent Dutch armor was made for the future kings in the early 1600s. This is a Spanish collar of torment, but early guidebooks said this was to put around the necks of scolding wives here in England. Here's a gigantic suit of armor set up next to a tiny suit. This is known as the Giant and the Dwarf. The largest and smallest suits of armor in the collection have been displayed side by side for a long time. The big armor was originally advertised as that of John of Gaunt, but it turned out he predated the armor. And this teeny suit of armor was either made for little Charles I or for the court dwarf Geoffrey Hudson. That's a pikeman's armor set. This is an antique plaster model of knights in combat. It depicts the death of Thomas, the Duke of Clarence, at the Battle of Boleyn in 1421. And here's another look at Henry VIII's armor. The displays continue on the next floor. This is the Lumley Horseman, which was made in 1580, displayed just like the kings were in the line of kings. Here are some relics from India, acquired by the East India Company, like a decorated helmet and dagger. They display more of their priceless artifacts while providing context on the history of the collection here at the tower, which is a great way to do it. On the left is a 16th century Italian helmet, next to it a double-barreled wheel-lock pistol, and a partisan from the city of Lyon, France. Here's some more classic armor that was collected by two private individuals who were inspired by the tower's museum. Eventually their arms and armor collections ended up here as well. A lot of this armor is German made from the Holy Roman Empire. These are some artifacts that were dug up in the River Thames right by the tower. A lot of deadly weapons ended up falling into the river. There are also some artistic firearms, like the Tiffany revolver. This one appears to be based off of R2-D2. This is a World War I memorial plaque for the men who worked here, but went off to serve in the Great War. These are the remains of a small chamber gun. And this is a bronze breech-loading 3-barreled gun from 1535. These are all from the collection of American newspaper magnate William Randolph Hearst. Even though he built his own castle in California, he restored a historic castle in Wales and put his armor collection in there. Again, this structure was a medieval arsenal for the most state-of-the-art military supplies of the day. This is so awesome. A grouping of staff weapons. These are from the time of Henry VIII. Here is some more royal arms and armor, including a jousting lance. That is some authentic armor of Henry VIII's horse. Here's some Stuart-era armor. As mentioned, Charles II was the one who started displaying stuff for visitors. That is the wooden head of Queen Elizabeth I. She was displayed here in the line of kings. These are the king's swords, including those of George I, George II, George III, George IV, William IV, Edward VII, George V, and this was the sword of George VI, who I think was a pretty great king. As an American, not a big fan of George III, but that's his sword, which is neat to see. This saddle was a gift from Sigismund, the King of Hungary and Holy Roman Emperor. He gave it to Henry V in 1416. And this is authentic Japanese shogun armor, presented to James I in 1613, part of a gift to mark the first ever trade agreement between Japan and Britain. There are so many cool weapons here. We have now entered the Chapel of St. John, a little Romanesque chapel within the White Tower. This is an original feature. It was built for William the Conqueror, but he died before it was completed. Now I'm heading up a small spiral staircase to explore more of the White Tower. Oh my gosh, that is awesome. There's a freaking dragon up here. The dragon is made up of a variety of armor and weapon parts. This is marvelous. I like how the claws are revolvers. The Board of Ordnance was based at the tower. They were in charge of maintaining forts and supplies for the Army and Navy. The Constable of the tower has been responsible for all tower operations. This is the death mask of Arthur Wellesley, the Duke of Wellington who defeated Napoleon at Waterloo and was a tower constable. The Royal Mint was also based at the tower for a long time. This is a bronze falcon cannon, probably Flemish from about 1520. Here are some examples of guns that would be stored here by the thousands. That is a 1680s matchlock organ gun, a multi-barrel gun that could be shot in a volley. That's interesting. This is a model of the Grand Storehouse. It was the largest building at the tower, but it was destroyed by a fire in 1841. A lot of important artifacts were lost with it. This is the Executioner's Axe, alongside the execution block that was used here at the tower for the execution of prisoners. It's unknown how many heads this specific axe chopped, but there were probably some famous figures beheaded by it. It was last used in 1747 to execute the Scottish Baron Simon Fraser of Lovat, who fought Hanoverian forces but had to surrender. He was imprisoned here and executed for treason. But his execution was kind of disastrous, as the stand collapsed and killed 9 spectators. That is a fake executioner's mask, but Victorian visitors were told it was the real thing. There were executions here into the 20th century. The last one was German spy Joseph Jacobs, who parachuted into England in 1941, but he was injured and captured. He was executed by firing squad here at the tower on August 14th, 1941. That is the chair he was seated in when he was shot to death. There's definitely some bullet damage on it. Not sure why, but there's a lot of coins and other things down there. Here's a model of the tower that lights up. There are some artifacts excavated around the tower, and it shows where they were located. Let's see where these cavalry sword blades were found. Here's a fire damaged gun from the Grand Storehouse. It was located right there. This breastplate was hit by a cannonball. Whoever was wearing this probably didn't survive that. There are some other interactive displays in here. This is definitely one of the best places I've ever been. In the lower level, there are tons of cannons and mortars. These are some bronze 12-pounders from the Napoleonic Wars. That's a very old mortar. There's also a lot of rifles and even spears in here. Some of these cannons and mortars are very intricate. The designs on them are great. These cannons definitely got some damage. In 1974, a bomb was placed down here. It killed 1 person and injured 35 others. Here's a display on some of the tower curiosities. which the early guidebooks really emphasized. Many of these are unusual war trophies, like this gilded statue of a winged lion. The bell was captured during the Crimean War. These are French staff weapons that were captured during the Napoleonic Wars. This miniature model of the Tower of London was made in 1842, just after the Grand Storehouse fire. It shows some buildings that are no longer here. That's a lead cistern, part of the tower's firefighting system. And this bronze 13-inch mortar was also captured during the Napoleonic Wars. Well, I am beyond impressed with the White Tower. Behind the White Tower is the Jewel House. This is the structure that houses the crown jewels. Some of Britain's most valuable treasures and gemstones are housed in there. Of course, they are owned by the royal family, but commoners have been able to pay to see them here for centuries. Now, for some reason, they don't allow photography inside there. The crown jewels are all known and publicized, so I don't see the harm in taking photos, but they don't, so I'm going to continue on to the rest of the tower. I would have gone in because I would like to see them, but I ran out of time by the end of the day. Some Queen's Guards are stationed outside the Jewel House. I caught a changing of the guards.
Outside, agree!
We've gone through the White Tower, and now we're going to go through the rest of the complex. There are lots of other towers to go into. I found some of the resident ravens perched on this old wall. The tower bridge is visible in the background. Thanks for posing for me, guys. Alright, we're going to be heading inside the ominous Bloody Tower, which was called the Garden Tower before children were murdered inside. The famed explorer Sir Walter Raleigh, the founder of the lost colony of Roanoke, was probably the most famous prisoner here at the Bloody Tower, and this room was his study. Even though he had been Queen Elizabeth's favorite, her successor James I had him arrested for treason and a supposed plot against him, and so Raleigh was stuck in the Bloody Tower for 13 years. Now, he had a lot of money, the interior was made more comfortable for him and his family, and they even had 3 servants, but he was apparently never in a good mental state while here. Raleigh spent lots of time in this study, trying to keep entertained during those 13 long years. He wrote his history of the world in here. Raleigh was finally released in 1616, went on one more foreign voyage, before he was arrested again and executed in 1618. Raleigh may have made this pipe, and this is a drug jar from Sir Walter Raleigh's confection, which was based on a medicinal remedy he created while imprisoned here. The two princes were imprisoned in this tower before they were probably murdered by their uncle, so he could take the throne. The name Bloody Tower is derived from them. This graffiti was found in 2018. It was made around the time this room was expanded for Walter Raleigh's family. This was the site of Sir Walter Raleigh's garden. He was allowed to create a medicine garden here, using lots of plants he found in South America, and he made herbal medicines. This is the passageway that goes beneath the Bloody Tower. Here's the foundation of the Cold Harbor Gate, built in 1238. This is the Bloody Tower. Raleigh's study is behind that second window. There is a torture exhibit right by the Bloody Tower. Now, torture wasn't as common here as it is often thought, but it is documented that 81 prisoners were tortured here in the 16th and 17th centuries. This is a replica of the rack that would stretch out the victim's limbs, sometimes dislocating and ripping them from their sockets. These are replica manacles. They were fastened around the wrists of the prisoners who were left hanging for hours on end. And this is the scavenger's daughter. The prisoner would be forced into a crouching position, and they would be scrunched up for an hour or so. It was probably quite uncomfortable. That's a wire polar bear sculpture. This is where one used to be chained up as part of the royal menagerie. Now I'm going to be walking under the Bloody Tower. That's the classic portcullis of the Bloody Tower. This is the Traitor's Gate. It was the entrance used to transport the Tudors' prisoners into the tower. Many famous prisoners entered through this gate, like Sir Thomas More, and it's popularly believed that Anne Boleyn entered through here, but that may be untrue. It's an unusual water gateway. It was flooded like this back in the day. There was actually an engine that originally ran on tidal force or by horsepower that could raise and lower the water. It was later a steam engine. Now I'm going to head up to the top level and through the medieval palace. Most of this section, including St. Thomas's Tower and the Traitor's Gate below, was built by Edward I in the late 1270s. The king used this room to meet with courtiers and other important subjects. This was King Edward's bedchamber, but all the furnishings and wallpaper are recreated, but they had a lot of sources to work with, so it's pretty close to how it looked. He had a very fancy bed, and it was very large because he was 6'2". Edward also had this little chapel and oratory on the side of his bedchamber. Here's another medieval spiral staircase. Now inside the older Wakefield Tower, which was built in 1220. This was King Henry III's palace and throne room. He was the father of Edward. The throne is a replica, but this is where it probably was. Here is the private chapel of King Henry. It has lots of textiles, painted decorations, and stained glass windows. That plaque says, by tradition, Henry VI died here in 1471. Yeah, he was not a great king and sorta went mad, so he was probably assassinated here by orders of King Edward IV. There's the view out toward the River Thames. There's a great view of the Tower Bridge from here. I did go up in its towers and have a separate video on that. This is the Lanthorn Tower, which was built in the 1220s and 30s. Here are some artifacts from life in Edward's court, which include about 700 people. Here's a small portable altarpiece like the ones Henry and Edward would have owned. That's a metal guy holding an axe, probably an executioner. Now inside the Salt Tower, which was where some dangerous prisoners were held, such as John Balliol, the King of Scots, and Hugh Draper, who was accused of practicing sorcery. There is a lot of graffiti left on the walls by the prisoners. All of this is centuries old. This was carved by Hugh Draper, the accused sorcerer. This thing is surrounded by the signs of the zodiac. This is an autograph left by Henry Walpole, who was a Catholic priest when Elizabeth came to power. She had him arrested and kept him in solitary confinement. He was hung by his hands from manacles so many times that his middle finger was torn out. He was eventually hung, drawn, and quartered. The path follows along the top of this wall. This tower has a display on guarding the Tower of London. The massive walls and towers made this a formidable war machine, and the men stationed here were armed with weapons like crossbows. And here's some more graffiti. It was carved by a Jesuit priest who was imprisoned here and tortured on the rack for plotting against Queen Elizabeth. This guy is defending the tower. Here in the Constable Tower, there's a model of the Tower of London as it appeared in 1381. A bunch of peasants attacked the tower that year. They were angered by a new poll tax, and this miniature shows them camping outside the tower. They did successfully break in, and they attacked the hated Simon Sudbury, the Archbishop of Canterbury, who was an advisor to the king and blamed for the attacks, and they beheaded him. But overall the rebellion failed. While the last execution here was during World War II, 11 men were found guilty of espionage and executed at the tower during World War I. The World War's executions occurred at the foot of this wall. The current guards of the towers are the Beefeaters, 32 yeoman warders who have been the guardians of the tower since Henry VIII. These select Beefeaters need to have at least 22 years of military service, and they do live here at the tower full time. There's the towering skyscrapers of the City of London. The way really old meets really new here in London is pretty incredible. There's the Gherkin. The Tower of London also used to be a zoo. The Royal Menagerie was established when King John started storing wild animals here, like a lion he got a hold of in the early 1200s. Then Henry III got the elephant. We already saw its enclosure. He also ended up with a polar bear, a bunch of leopards, hyenas, and more. So there were some big animals here for centuries. But after George IV's death, the Royal Menagerie at the tower was closed, and the animals were relocated to the London Zoo. Not sure what's going on in here. During World War I, the tower was used as a recruitment and training center, all the while it stayed open to visitors despite the daytime air raids. These poppies were part of a World War I memorial that was here. There's the steeple of the Church of St. Peter in Chains, and behind it is the Shard, the tallest building in London. Back on the ground level, there's one of the Beefeaters in uniform. So now we'll head into the Church of St. Peter ad Vincula. This church was built in 1520 and was the parish church of the tower. This is a tomb outside. This is a very historic church, and there are a lot of famous people buried in here who were executed at the Tower of London. There's a memorial to the Duke of Wellington. This is the Royal Pavement, under which Queen Anne Boleyn and Queen Catherine Howard are buried. Though it's kind of hard to see from this far away, Lady Jane Grey is also buried under there. She was queen for 9 days, but Mary took the throne and had her executed. This is a 300-year-old organ. All the kings and queens have heard it play since 1699. There's also a tribute to the people of Ukraine in the war they are currently fighting. This is a memorial to John Holland, former constable of the tower. There are several other tombs of the executed in the crypt, which visitors sadly can't visit. Sir Thomas More is entombed down there. The Tower Green is on the side of the chapel, and that is where the executions took place, or at least that's where it's thought to have happened. Turns out it's probably the wrong spot. The Tudor-style building facing the Tower Green is the Queen's House. It was built in 1530 during the reign of Henry VIII, and he built it for his second wife, Anne Boleyn, who was later beheaded in front of it. And there's a Queen's Guard stationed outside his box. It is now home to the resident governor of the tower. However, the Queen could choose to stay and live here if she wanted. This is the 1281 Beauchamp Tower, yet another tower that held some high-profile prisoners. It has an exhibit on imprisonment at the tower. I've mentioned several of the most famous prisoners, but there were a lot more. I didn't know that William Penn was imprisoned here in 1668 for promoting his illegal Quaker beliefs. After he got out, he led Quakers to America and founded Pennsylvania. Only 22 executions have taken place at the tower, and a lot of those were during the 20th century. Henry VIII had 2 of his 6 wives beheaded here. On the 2nd floor of this tower, where a lot of prisoners were held in the 16th and 17th centuries, there's tons of graffiti adorning the walls. Some of the graffiti is very intricate. Guess they had a lot of time on their hands. The Lady Jane Grey's husband was imprisoned here before he was executed. His beheaded body was shown to Jane Grey just before she was executed. Here's a corridor built inside the defensive wall. It has lots of loop slit windows for bows. Checking in on the Jewel Tower guards. These guys have been out here for a couple of hours. They're stationed in between the Waterloo Battery. These 6-pounder guns were captured at the Battle of Waterloo. Since Wellington was constable of the tower, he wanted all the weapons captured after that battle preserved. This building was an old officers' quarters, but now it is home to the Fusiliers Museum. So let's take a look at that. The Fusiliers are an esteemed British infantry regiment that was formed in 1685 by King James II. Originally, it was largely composed of men stationed here at the tower. Their purpose was to guard the guns and munitions of the Tower of London, but eventually they were stationed somewhere else after being based at the tower for 200 years. Here's a placard about Major John Andre, who was a Royal Fusilier, and during the American War of Independence, as it's called here, he was a spy, but he was caught and hanged. This is an Eagle standard of the French 82nd Regiment. It was captured by the British during the Napoleonic Wars in 1809. So the Royal Fusiliers have fought in many wars over the centuries, including the American War of Independence, in which they were beaten pretty badly at Cowpens. Sorry, I'm American, I have to mention it. They also served in the Crimean War, India, and the Boer Wars. That iron boot was used to uncover a defaulter. They were involved with World War I. These relics are from the Great War. They also ended up in Korea during that war. There's a heavy snow jacket because it was very cold there in winter. All of these artifacts were used in South Africa during the Boer Wars era. This was the Fusilier uniform of King George V, who was the Colonel-in-Chief of the Royal Fusiliers during the 1930s until his death. This wax depiction of him is also holding his sword. Here are some World War II pieces, including some relics liberated from the Nazis. This is the taxidermied head of Donald Duck, the mascot of the 9th Battalion of the Royal Fusiliers. This white tablecloth was used by the German troops to waive surrender at the Battle of Monte Cassino in Italy. That's pretty neat. Here's a full case of German relics taken during World War I. This is a more modern Fusilier uniform, adapted for the combat of today. And here's a giant GPMG machine gun. This is an interesting museum, a good addition that I think a lot of people skip over. There's a portrait of Fusilier Maurice James Dease, who was killed in action during the Great War. These are Victoria Crosses that were awarded to Fusiliers. They are the most prestigious military awards in Britain. And here's a whole bunch more British medals. There are even extra cases to open. This is an amazing Flemish cannon. It has decorations on it like St. Michael overthrowing Satan. That is one of the coolest cannons I've ever seen. Now I'm walking back down beneath the Bloody Tower and past the Trader's Gate to see the Mint exhibit. The Royal Mint was here at the tower from 1279 to 1812. So for centuries, all the coins and currency of the British Empire were produced here. Edward I introduced lots of new coins. They were made of silver, so people would often cut off the edges and pocket the clippings, though if they got caught they could be sentenced to death. These coins were hidden by a Jewish merchant, though he was never able to recover them because he was arrested. At one point, Elizabeth I visited the Royal Mint. She even supposedly struck some gold coins herself. During Elizabeth's reign, the English coin lost a lot of value, so she ordered all old coins brought back and remade into new coins with her portrait on them. Here's a replica screw coin press. Eventually they figured out how to protect the coins from illegal clipping. Here are some interesting 17th century coins and trial plates, including a Cromwell crown and a Charles II gold trial plate. Isaac Newton was appointed as the warden of the Mint in 1696 to oversee the Great Recoinage. He calculated some efficient ways of going about completely revamping Britain's currency. And here are some golden guinea coins.
Give yourself up. There's a good man. Go ahead, police. Come along. You get up by it.
You need to stay with us.
It's okay, it's okay, it's okay. It's okay. Thank you.
Alright, so that's gonna do it for the Tower of London. Unfortunately, I didn't make it in to see the crown jewels, but I couldn't have shown them anyways. This place is so overwhelming. The layers of history are so impressive, and I think this is one of my favorite places I've ever been. Now I'm going to walk around the entire Tower of London. Across from the tower, people can dine in these glass capsules. Also, I will mention that the Truffle Burger food truck out front is surprisingly really good. Here's what the Trader's Gate looks like from the outside. This is where a lot of prisoners were brought in on a barge before being locked up in some dreary tower. This is the Queen's Garden, a tribute to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II for the Platinum Jubilee. There's a crown. This is the middle tower, which is separated from the rest of the complex by the moat. Seriously, the Tower of London is gargantuan. This is the moat of the Tower of London, which has recently undergone a transformation into super bloom. A sea of beautiful flowers now fill the moat of the tower. This year was the first time this has ever been done, especially for the Platinum Jubilee. Hopefully they'll keep this during the summer months in the future, because wow, this is beautiful. It is possible to walk through the flowers in the moat, but it costs extra, so I decided against it. It's also operating on separate time slots, which is irritating, but this is a wonderful use of the old moat. The flowers are very colorful against the stark medieval walls of the tower. Here's a sign signifying that this is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. There's the top of the Tower Hill Memorial, and behind it 10 Trinity Square. These are the remains of the Tower Hill postern, a medieval gate tower that was part of the city wall. And here's where the Tower Bridge starts, right alongside the Tower of London. So the Tower of London is absolutely amazing. A definite must-see while in London. If you enjoyed this tour of the tower, then please consider liking this video, sharing it, and subscribing to my channel. I make videos on all sorts of historic locations like this, as well as museums, roadside attractions, natural wonders, and more, here in Europe and in America. I did film several other videos in London on this trip, Also make sure to watch part 1, which featured the White Tower. That video is linked in the description. Thanks for watching.